everybody, and welcome to our live stream today. I am David. We'll get into all that in a moment. I just want to make sure, can everybody see me and hear me? If you can, give me a thumbs up. Let me know. Let me know where you're from, right? I'm seeing some folks that I see thumbs up coming in. That's wonderful. By the way, we are actually experimenting today with a brand new, I shouldn't say this, right? Because then the demo gods are going to come down on me. But we're experimenting today with a brand new streaming service. So I'm seeing some of the interaction here for the first time. Excellent. Oh, thank you, Michelle. I see some thumbs up coming in. And I'm assuming if you're giving thumbs up, you can also hear me. So that is wonderful. All right, we'll just give another minute for folks to come in. Right, I hope they give me an early holiday gift today. By the way, I noticed that a bunch of you have started answering those polls. Thank you so much for doing that. If you haven't seen them, take a look at some of the polls there. If you look at your menu, you should see a little option for polls there. Answer those if you would, because it gives me a better idea of all of you and kind of like where you're coming from. I like to tailor things live as we go based on some of those answers. So that's really wonderful if you do that. And then just a little housekeeping as well. If you want to ask questions, like feel free. I mean for this to be interactive, right? It's you and me today, right? So feel free to have conversation with the other attendees and myself and such in the chat there. But if you've got questions, I really ask you to put them in the Q&A, because then that helps me kind of like manage those and make it so everybody else can see them. So make sure you're asking your questions in the Q&A. And I do see a bunch of stuff coming through in the polls. All right. Okay, so with that, why don't we go ahead and start getting into some of our fun content here. Well, hello again. I am David Jones-Gilardi. I'm a developer relations engineer and a GenAI nerd. Last two years with regard to GenAI, I've been going through this, this whole path with everybody in this space right now, right? It's still relatively new, but overall, I've been coding for almost 30 years now, right? In many different languages. Right now, I'm focused on Python. I spent a lot of time as a backend API developer in Java. I've done mobile stuff, right? Nowadays focused on the GenAI world. If you want to connect with me at all on LinkedIn or X or something like that, feel free to scan those codes and reach out. Okay, so let's look at what we're going to talk about today. Now, by the way, I want to be clear. I do have some slides that you see here, but I like to go few on slides, more on live, right? So I'm just going to have a couple things that we're going to talk about here, and then we're going to get into actually doing things with the keyboard. So the first thing I want to approach here is the overall problem space, right? Because this whole talk is about doing, building a RAG pipeline, but then also using something, a pair programmer, like an AI pair programmer with Copilot, in this particular case, to help then you speed up being able to build RAG-based apps based off that RAG pipeline. But the first thing we need to understand is the problem space. Why do we need something like RAG, right? So we're gonna, kind of delve into that just for a moment. Then I'm gonna just very briefly talk about vector embeddings. Now, for all of you in the poll who did mention that you're not familiar with vector embeddings, I'm going to give the most basic of primers, but I have some resources for you that if you want to dig in, that you can, it'll help you really understand what those mean, right? Because it does help if you have a little understanding what vector embeddings are, then it makes the RAG part, a lot more approachable, right? And then we're going to get into what is RAG. And then finally, we're going to build a RAG pipeline. So this is where the fun comes in. We're actually going to build the RAG pipeline real time. We're going to do it from scratch. And then we're also going to build a very basic chatbot with Copilot, and then use that to hook all this together and create an end-to-end loop of our RAG pipeline and a working chatbot. Okay, let me see. By the way, I am looking. No questions. Okay, great. All right, so the problem space. How many of you, give me the thumbs up. I can see them come in, right? If you use like ChatGPT or Anthropic or something like that, I think most people now, by the way, when I talk at events and things, most people are raising their hands today. We've been 2 years into this GenAI thing. Yes, I see all the thumbs up coming. That's awesome. So most of us have done something like that, where we've interacted with an LLM or a large language model over one of these types of interfaces. But here's the question for you. What happens if you ask an open-ended question like this? Like, when did I start coding? Right? What's it going to do? Well, in most cases, unless you are, let's say, a celebrity, or if it knows something about you, it's too open-ended, right? It's it's not going to have context. The LLM is not going to know who you are or what you're referring to, right? And it's this kind of problem that we're actually looking to solve, right? Because if you think about it, the LLMs, they're trained on this huge corpus of knowledge that has been exposed out in the internet and such, but they don't know anything about our personal domain or our business domain. Maybe they know something about your website's front page, but they're not going to know any of the internals. And we see this a lot with RAG pipelines and stuff. We see a lot where folks are trying to build like very intelligent like support bots per se, right? Per se. And in that case, they need to be either trained on or aware of business domain knowledge in order to provide the correct answers, accurate answers. So this is what we're trying to solve here. We want to solve the context problem. How can we augment the context of the LLM in real time with our applications? Okay, now I said I was going to give the most basic of primers on embeddings, and I'm not joking at all. So let's just look at a quick definition, right? So what are embeddings? They are a representation of data that computers can easily understand. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to pop over to the database here. And, I've tried to make sure that these are at a good font size and everything that everyone can read them. If you have any trouble there, just let me know. I can always zoom in if you need it. But really what I want to point out is, vector embeddings are, yes, Seb, this is live. Totally. Yes. And now it's live because I just used your name. Yes. Yes, it is definitely live. So vector embeddings, they are essentially a representation, like I said, of data that computers can easily understand. And if I take one of these here, I'm going to go ahead and pop this in, and they are these huge arrays. Like in the case that I'm using here, I'm using one of OpenAI's embedding models, the text embedding 3 small. It is 1,536 dimensions. So there's 1,536 elements in this array. Now, if you didn't know better and you just looked at this, you might just think this was noise, right? But what's actually happened here is that the embedding model has converted, if you will, a chunk of text into this big array. It's encoded semantic information and contextual information into this array. And this is putting it in a format that computers can easily understand, right? And so this actually forms, like, understanding what's going on here definitely helps with an understanding of what's going on in RAG. I'll show you a little bit more on that as we move forward. But just understand that these embeddings, again, are encoding semantic and contextual information into these number formats that computers can understand and we can do comparisons with. Now, like I said, I'm just giving the most basic primer of vector embeddings. I'm going to move myself out of the way here. Boop. So if you want to dig deeper into vector embeddings, right, scan that QR code. That'll bring you to a blog post that's going to go into some really nice detail. By the time you're done with that blog post, I think you're going to have a really good idea of what they're doing and how they work. I'm not digging into it super far here because we're going to spend some other time on RAG and building the app and everything like that. So again, scan that QR code. That should bring you right to a blog post that'll give you a really nice basic primer, actually a deeper primer than what I'm doing obviously right now on vector embeddings. All right, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and pop back in. Boop. There we go. All right, so let's then talk a little bit about RAG, right? So RAG is Retrieval Augmented Generation, right? Now, what does that actually mean? Let's break it down, right? So what we want to do, if you remember the question I posed in the beginning, we have this case where the LLM is missing context, right? It doesn't know something about me or the business domain or yourself or whatever it is, right? Whatever you're asking. So we're going to retrieve some data that we're then going to apply to the LLM to augment its generation. So in a first case where it may not know what we're talking about, right? Its generation came out and saying, hey, I don't have context. I don't know who you are or something like that. We can retrieve information to put in the context that then will essentially augment that generation. And we can do this, like we're going to do this live today. We're going to do this here in a moment. So what we're going to do is we're going to build out a RAG pipeline. We're going to do that right now, actually. And then we're going to wrap this application around it. And as we go through, I'll explain more about what's going on with RAG. All right, so let's go ahead and build things. Okay, so the tools, by the way, I should kind of mention what I'm using. So the tools here are both, this is part of DataStax's AI platform. The one that you see here in front of you is DataStax Langflow. So I was having a conversation earlier here with Chevet about Langflow. Matter of fact, if you see a little call out just popped up. Now, Langflow is an open source. It's a free open source tool that allows you to visually build out GenAI workflows. So you can encapsulate all of your GenAI logic here in Langflow in a low-code way, right? And then you can wrap your application around that, and you can build your apps on top of it. And I'm going to show this to you. This is part of what we're going to do live, right? And this is one aspect of what we're going to use to build out our RAG pipeline. Now, the other part here is DataStax Astra. This is also part of the DataStax AI platform. As a matter of fact, if you were to sign up for an Astra account, you would see here that you have both AstraDB and Langflow. You can just switch between them. I just have them in different tabs right now. So AstraDB is a fully vector-supported database. It also stores not just vector information, but all of your metadata and everything like that. So you're not limited to like just vector indexes or anything. So you can actually store all of your application's data here. But it's been optimized for vector storage, retrieval, search, things like that. We're going to use that here today. It also has a feature called Vectorize. We're going to explore this a little bit later when we get into building our RAG pipeline. But what it allows you to do is Vectorize allows you to automatically vectorize your data on ingest and at query time. So what you're essentially doing is you're hooking up, let's say, OpenAI. You just provide your key or Mistral. Or in the case of NVIDIA, it comes pre-installed. So even in the free tier, by the way, if you were to create a vector-enabled collection, they will all have the NVIDIA embedding provider ready to go. And what that translates into is when you're ingesting data and such like that into your database, it'll automatically create these vector embeddings for you. And then when you query, it'll do the same thing. So we're going to explore that. So we have Astra and Langflow. Okay. And I see a question just popped in here. How could individual fields in a PDF be filled by the LLM using information? That's a great question, by the way. I'm just about to do that. So we're gonna take a look at that. Okay, so here in Langflow, if I don't have any other flows, I'm going to see a view that looks like this. And then if I click on new flow, you get this nice dialog that pops up with all sorts of templates. Now, the one we're going to focus on today is this vector store RAG, but there are all sorts of things that are in here, right? Agents, matter of fact, I was talking with Chevet earlier about agentic flows, right? Matter of fact, there's a simple agent here. So you just click one of these and go. So I'm going to start here with this vector store RAG. And what's cool about these templates, I mean, you can start with a blank canvas if you want, but the template is giving you essentially all the various underlying components you need to get going. And it's pretty well filled out, right? Obviously, for your particular application, there might be things that you're going to change and update, but you can start with this and you're 95% of the way there. Now, in any RAG pipeline, like you see here, there's essentially two components, right? Two different parts of the flow. You've got here where you're going to load some data, right? You need to get data into the system. So if you remember a moment ago, I was looking at this table, this collection, I should say, and I had data with these vector embeddings, but where did those come from, right? How do I generate those? We're going to do that now. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to go ahead and as part of this, I'm going to create a new collection and call it Langflow. Now notice here, I mentioned that thing Vectorize, right? So I'm actually telling it, I've configured OpenAI and Mistral, but NVIDIA is here. I'm going to use that provider and I'm just saying create. So what this is doing, it's creating a vector-enabled collection, and then it's enabling the NVIDIA embedding model. So when I ingest data, it will automatically vectorize it for me, and at query time, it'll do the same thing. Okay. All right, and then the second part, and we're gonna fill this out. We're gonna build this here, and then we'll get to our app here in a moment. The second part is the retriever flow, or like the query time, right? So this is the part where we are going to then reference the vector data that we have in our RAG pipeline. This is how we're doing the retrieval part, right? And then we're going to use that to fit into the context of our LLM. Can you vectorize retroactively? Yeah, exactly. So like, let's say that you have, and that's a great question, Olga. So let's say that you have a case where you already have some data that is in place, right? And you want to vectorize that data. Now, what you probably end up doing is, you can't just add vector support to an existing collection that did not have it, right? But if you did have a vector-based collection, you just didn't vectorize data to begin with, then you could go follow up. So if you had existing data, what you'd probably do is create a new collection that is vector-enabled and then just move the data from one to the other while you vectorize the data. Yeah, that would be a way to do it. So it's not, if you haven't created as a vectoring collection, no, As long as that collection is vector enabled, then yes. Okay, let's take a look. All right, let's come on over here real quick. All right, good. So now I have my Langflow collection. It is using the NVIDIA NV Embed QA model, but there's no data. And this is exactly where we want to be right now. Okay. So what I'm going to do is let's go ahead and take a look at the setup here. Now, in the vector store RAG pipeline, we do default to using OpenAI. Now, you might ask, you just talked about this vectorize thing, and vectorize is meant to automatically vectorize your data and such like that. Well, Langflow has agnostic support for all sorts of model providers, including embedding providers, right? There's a ton in here, right? We just happen to default to OpenAI. So if I had a regular collection, and Olga, this kind of gets to the question you just asked. If I had like a regular vector or a regular non-vector collection, and I fed data through here, this embedding provider hooked up to my AstroDB piece would in fact facilitate generating those embeddings. But because I'm using vectorize in this case, and I already have the collection, I'm just going to remove this. And then I'm going to set up vectorize here at the database level, right? So I'm going to say this. I'm going to go choose an option, level up your RAG. So that is the database that we're using, level up your RAG, okay? And then I'm going to say I want the Langflow collection, right? So it sees a collection. I'm going to come down here. I'll say I want to use vectorize. Yeah, I picked NVIDIA and the MV Embed QA model. Now, this stuff here, like the model parameters and stuff, we're not going to use those right now. So I'm just going to turn those off to clean things up a little bit. Okay. Okay, cool. Then I'm going to come in here. I'm going to say, when did I start coding? So by the way, so I mentioned Langflow as a way to visually build out GenAI workflows. And you can see that I have this like nice kind of drag and drop interface, right? If I had like something I wanted to bring over from here or whatever, I would just drag it in and wire it up, right? The template essentially has done that for us, right? It's set it up so it's already kind of hooked up, but I wanted to point that out. For also, for those of you here who are coders, right? And you're like, okay, this low code thing is great, but I really like to get my hands dirty. Well, you can get into all the code. It's all Python under the hood. You can modify this, customize it to your own needs. But again, for the purposes of setting up a quick RAG pipeline, it's been built out for you. Okay, so I've got this chat input. This is the way that I'm going to communicate with my bot, the way I'm going to communicate with my RAG pipeline. I have this AstroDB component, which is our vector store. Also to point out, though, Langflow has support for all sorts of other vector stores, right? It's not just AstroDB. Now, one of the benefits you get when you're using DataStax Langflow here as part of DataStax's stuff is you notice it's automatically hooked up. So that saves some time and everything. Now, once I have some data, I'm actually going to ask it a question. Oh, and let me hook up my key. You do need, there we go. I'm going to pop that through real quick. Okay. Actually, I see a question. Dilip, does this all apply to multimodal RAG too? How are they different? That depends. So this in this particular case, this is set up in a text. The mode is text, right? It's a text-based thing. If you're talking like images and audio, there are ways that you can augment those and add that kind of stuff in here. But the basic RAG pipeline is just text. Syed, are these models you are using, OpenAI, NVIDIA, are free with DataStax Langflow? Yes. If you are talking vectorize here, there is no charge to use this. As a matter of fact, the NVIDIA one comes as part of your vector collection. It is totally free. But if you were to use like OpenAI, for example, you just give it your OpenAI key. There is no license charge, anything here. All we're doing is facilitating the back end for you to make it so you remove a set of steps. It actually ends up being a little faster too. And it makes it's about removing friction. It's about getting it so it's much easier for you to generate your embeddings and stuff. But no, there is no charge for this part now. Okay. All right, let's come back over and let's go to our thing. All right, so what I did a moment ago was I asked the bot, when did I start coding? But our collection's empty, right? There's nothing in it. So it should probably, if I look at the playground, right, check that out. So we asked GPT-4o Mini, hey, when did I start coding? It doesn't have context, right? This is what I was talking about in the very beginning, because our data set is empty. So it doesn't know anything about us. So what our goal is now is we're going to add some data into the system. and then we're going to inject it into the context, and I'll show that to you. Okay. All right. So let's pop down here to the bottom. Now you saw what I did a second ago. I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to copy my, duplicate this guy because I've already done this, right? I already configured that. So I'm just going to wire this up. Now let's go ahead and talk about what's happening here. So when you generate data for your RAG pipeline, there are a couple different, or a set of different ways you could do it. You could be hooked up to, say, some API, or you could be looking at multiple files or a directory, or read from a webhook or a database or something like that, right? That part of it really doesn't matter as much. What I'm going to do for our purposes today is I'm going to ingest a PDF that I have that is essentially just a PDF on my career. I'm not like that egocentric. I just happen to have this, and it makes a good vignette to kind of break down what's actually happening. But notice the question I asked originally: when did I start coding? Right. So my goal here is to give the LLM context of when I started coding. Now you'll notice I load this here, this everything in 20 slides. Here, I'm just going to run this real quick. Yep, and I'm going to populate data, and then I'm going to show you something as we go. No, Syed, you do not need to pay. Yeah, so the way that when you're working with OpenAI or any of the model providers, right? Yes, you will need an account with OpenAI or Anthropic or Mistral, whoever it is, right? So you're paying them when you're doing the conversion, right? When you're generating vector embeddings, or if you're asking the LLM questions. Like technically right here, when I am putting the input into this LLM and I'm using OpenAI's GPT-4o Mini with my key, I am paying a very, very small amount for the tokens and the processing that go into that LLM. And that is because I'm using a public-facing, model provider. One thing I will point out is that Langflow does support Ollama. I'm not going to get into that today, but Ollama.com, check it out. It allows you to run local models, right? So if you don't want to have to worry about that part, you could just run them locally as long as your hardware supports it. That's really kind of the key piece on that one. Okay, let's see. Do I have another question there? No, Abe, I did not see your question until now, and I just talked about Ollama. That's kind of funny. OpenAI keys and Anthropic want to run privately locally, e.g. Ollama, and not share any data with third parties, perhaps later to deploy. Yeah, you can absolutely do like AWS Bedrock or Azure. You'll see that like Azure, OpenAI, Amazon Bedrock, a lot of folks do for security reasons. Same thing with Ollama, right? Yes, those are all options. And as a matter of fact, let's say you wanted to do one of those, you would literally just drag it out, set up your connection, and then just hook it up, right? So Langflow makes that like super easy. And okay. All right, I see your questions, by the way, Luke and Chris. I am not ignoring those. I'm gonna come back as we get through this, through the material. Okay, so a moment ago, what I did was I executed this part of the flow. This is the part that is loading the data. So if we take a look and we come back over to our collection, I should have some data. Yes, I do. Notice that I have these chunks of data here and that they have these embeddings. So let's take a look. Let's dig into what just happened there. Well, for one, I pulled the data out of this PDF, right? There's this PDF, it's got data in it. Then what we've done is we've done something called chunking, right? So if I come over here, all right, chunking, if you think about it, so chunking is a method that you use in RAG, but not only with RAG. But what it does is it chunks the data up into smaller pieces that then you encode into those vector embeddings. Why is this important? Because if you think about it, right, when we look at these big arrays, yes, they're these absolutely huge arrays, right? But the more data that you inject into one of those arrays, the less detail you can maintain in the actual embedding itself. Imagine instead of doing a chunk, in this case, we're using just chunk sizes of 1,000 characters with a 200 character overlap, right? So it's going to iterate through my PDF, going to look at 1,000 characters with a little 200 character overlap. It's going to take each chunk and it's going to create a vector embedding for it. And matter of fact, you can take a look here. There's 3 chunks. So each one of these chunks will have a vector embedding generated for it. You might ask yourself, well, why don't you just like chunk the whole thing? Or could I take a whole book or 1,000 books or something and put them in one huge, one embedding, right? One embedding. You can technically, but what's going to happen is the more and more data that you put into that single embedding, right, then you're going to lose more and more data. It's going to be too coarse, right? So you need some way to control the data that you're putting in, so you ensure that there is enough information, enough contextual information in that embedding when you search it's meaningful, right? That's why we chunk. And you'll see that there's all sorts of other types of splitters. They get a lot more intelligent. The split text here one is like super simple, just chunk every 1,000 characters. And then at that, it takes this data and it's going to put it in my database, in this case, my Langflow collection using NVIDIA with MV Embed QA. And so that is what you see here. So essentially, the data that is in each of these chunks has been encoded into this array. And now I can use the vector abilities of the database to perform a similarity search. And let's do that. So I've got data in. Now remember before when I did this query, it said I don't have context, right? When did I start coding? So as that runs, what's going to happen is it is going to apply this question. It's actually going to convert this into the same embedding space. This is why you can do a natural language query against the data. It's going to convert that into the same embedding space. It's going to pull back here the results. It's going to take those results and it's going to put, as a matter of fact, I do want to make one modification here. Yeah, here we go. I'm going to turn this on. In my case here, I'm just going to grab the top result. That's really what I want in this one. So let's see. I'll let that do its thing. But it's going to pull back these results and it will inject that into the prompt. So let's take a look at the prompt for a moment. So I mentioned this context, right? Right here, this is the key thing when you're working with a RAG pipeline, how you inject data into the context. Let me see some thumbs up and stuff if you've done any kind of prompt engineering, even if it means you went to ChatGPT and you asked to do like a question answer kind of thing, or if you've worked with context. Let me see. I see some coming through. Wonderful. Right. So all prompt engineering is like, I could literally take this and plop this into ChatGPT and it would work, right? Given some information, right? The same kind of thing. But all we're doing is we're essentially taking a set of data. We're going to actually programmatically inject it into this context. We're just going to put it here. And now when we ask the question, given the context above, answer the question as best as possible. Now the LLM has something to go off of. Okay, let's see. So if I take a look at my generated prompt, so check out what happened. Let me back up a little bit here. So I got the results, right? I take the results out. Now, when I get these results, I just want the text. So what I'm doing is I'm parsing out the text. That's what this parse data component does. Notice that it's wired up, right? So if I take that, notice it's wired into the context. I can literally wire it in. And then the question, the original question we asked, is also wired in to my prompt. So when I generate this is actually the generated prompt, right? So you can see where it says, given the context above, well, here's what I pulled from that PDF. Here's the question. And now if we come to our playground, we can see, there you go. This time the LLM got it right. It had accurate information because it was provided that. We augmented its context. And now we have this generation of accurate data. Okay, let me see. I see some questions came through while I was talking there. Yeah, Luke, how would you recommend utilizing dynamic RAG vectors that change with new information being added? This is a great question. We actually see this a lot, especially for folks that have time-sensitive data, right? What happens if you have like a support chatbot and, like a new piece of information comes in that is, say, more technically correct, and you sure don't want somebody talking to the bot and get information from like a year ago. That's actually where you get into some more advanced RAG techniques. My colleague, Rodrigo here is actually one of the co-creators of Langflow, did some blog posts on this where he talks about you can apply weights and things like that. So in a case like that, maybe what you would do is you'd say new data has more weight than the old data. And so it would naturally kind of come up to the top. There are a bunch of different ways you can use re-ranking and things like that. Yeah, so there are ways that you can apply like different methods to ensure that the data that you're getting, like in the case that you asked, is really what you're looking for. Let's see, Chris Millar, how is output generated from vector data? If we have structured validated data need accuracy in the responses, should we consider graph DBs? Yeah, that's a loaded question. That is a loaded question. So when you say, how is output generated from vector data? So what's actually happening right, is if you take a look, if I do the same question, I'm going to say, when did I start coding? If I did this here in the database level. Now remember, because I have vectorize, I can just do this at the database level, right? And if you take a look, see what's happening here is when I ask this question, if I clear that out, I don't have a similarity score. When I say, when did I start coding? What's happening is this is being converted into the same vector space as those. A vector, it's actually a distance calculation. It's comparing the vectors and saying, which ones are the most similar? Which ones are the closest, right? And the top one that comes up is this one here, right? And so then I pull that data out, right? So when you're saying how the output generated from vector data, I think that's the question you're asking. So what happens is that is that's the response I get in the data, and that's what I'm injecting into the context. So imagine in my case here, I've only got three chunks, but imagine I had millions of them, right? And then you want to be able to pull out just those relevant chunks. That's where that's happening. Okay. Oh, Henry, agent stopped due to max iterations. That very well, if you're doing like an agentic flow, that could be on a couple different places. That could actually be at the LLM level if there's any rate limiting. I'd have to see more what you're doing there. Let's see. Yeah, so Glenio, how do you modify the context? Yeah. So in Langflow, when you encapsulate any variable in curly braces like this, right, it will then be exposed as a prompt variable. So if I were to say like this, I were to say Glenio, right? And what it'll do is notice now I have a new Glenio input, right? Then I can wire something in and that will inject it into my prompt, much like what we did earlier, right? So that's how we're modifying the context in this case. Okay, so great. So guess what? We have this working RAG pipeline, but we're not done, right? We're not done. So what we need to do now we're getting the right answer. Now we know we're hooked up to our data. So we're going to go to the next fun part here. All right, so I'm in VS Code. This is where Copilot's going to come into play. I did see from the polls earlier that it looks like some of you, when I asked the question, about little less than half are using Copilot or like an AI pair programmer. You could be talking about like, V0 with Vercel does this, Cursor, Copilot, Anthropic, ChatGPT. They all have this kind of mechanism, right? Copilot is really cool because it integrates directly here with VS Code. I see almost half of you, though, know what they are, but you're not using them yet. Maybe that'll change today. We'll see. All right, so here's what we're going to do. Here's the setup. I've got Copilot here on the left. We have no code here. I've just created an app.py. This will be in Python. I have the browser we're going to use to visualize this app. And we're going to build this thing. We're just going to build it. So I'm going to say, and by the way, for Copilot itself, it's just an extension, right? You can just install it and kind of sign up for the GitHub Copilot program and things like that. It takes a couple minutes. Okay, let's build a basic chatbot using Python and Streamlit. So for my Python devs out there, if you're not familiar with Streamlit, I really like it a lot. Python's not really known for its front end. And what it allows you to do is it allows you to very quickly build out front ends without having to worry about all the underlying HTML and CSS. That's why I'm using it here. Now let's take a look at what Copilot did. I just said, let's build a basic chatbot using Python and Streamlit. And immediately, it's saying, hey, you need to pip install this. Okay, let's do that. And then it gives me some base code. So I'm going to take that and pop it in here. Now, one thing I really want to point out is because of the format of what we're doing here, right? I'm going a little faster in real life when I'm doing this. And I strongly suggest this to all of you. You should absolutely always read and understand the code. These are the LLMs that are backing this. They're not going to give you a perfect response every time. I do not expect a one-shot everything you do. You need to understand what it's doing as well. I've found that these are wonderful, wonderful tools to augment my abilities, not to replace them. But it's going to get you, say, like 95% of the way there. It's like you're having a conversation with another coder, right? That's how I would couch doing this. So always, always read the code and understand what's going on. But for now, I'm going to ignore everything I just said, and we're going to go faster. Okay, so great. So it gave me some basic code. And then it's telling me down here to run Streamlit run app.py. So already that's actually pretty darn cool, right? The fact that, before I used Streamlit, I'm familiar enough with Python to know that I do a pip install, but how to run it and things like that, like it's pretty cool that out of the gate, Copilot did a very nice job of setting this up for me, right? And now we actually have a basic running app. And you can see, by the way, like the basic front end UI, that's coming from Streamlit. Now, if I say something like, hi, oh, okay. There we go, like that, go, hi, right? It says hello, but it's not really intelligent, right? It's not hooked up to anything. So what we want to do is now we want to take this chatbot and we want to hook it up to our RAG pipeline so we have a real working end-to-end application. All right, so here's what here's what we're going to do. We have the base, so it has a basic chatbot in here, right? That's what I asked it to do. Great. Okay, now Langflow, once you've got your GenAI pipeline work, set up, whether it's agentic or chatbot, or in this case, RAG pipeline, in order to really get use out of it, you need to be able to hook your app up, right? That is where the API comes into play. So an API endpoint will be exposed to you that you can use. We also have these Python API and JS. They should really be called SDK, but the Python and JS tabs here auto-generate an SDK for you to use. So you'll see that here's all of my connection params. Tweaks, by the way, we're not going to use them today, but they come into play when you want to modify. So you can modify all these parameters programmatically at runtime. You are not limited to what is only here in the UI, right? I want to make that very clear. So you can tweak those things. Like I said, we're not going to do today. But what we're really after is probably this, where we want to run this thing and talk to it. This is us talking through the endpoint, but it has a lot of other boilerplate stuff and things like that, because it's essentially assuming that you're starting with a fresh module, Python module. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy that. And I'm going to come over here and I'm going to say to our friend Copilot, modify the highlighted code to implement the following SDK. Okay. And I'm literally just going to give it that code, right? Now you can see right away, I'm seeing some promising things here, right? The fact that it's actually got some statics here that have the values, the endpoint values that come out of what Langflow gave us. We can see some code. So I can see that it's hooking things up, right? So what I'm going to do here is, let's just go bloop, and I'm going to say, yep, accept. Again, this is one of those things where you should really understand what's going on. And then it's telling me to run again. Now we're already running, but let's take a look at what it did here. All right, so I've got my endpoint. That's what's happening here. I'm not doing anything with tweaks. You can see it's hooked up the basic kind of endpoint. Again, this is using the code that was coming out of here. But what's interesting is it actually did exactly what I asked for it, right? It didn't do a bunch of extra stuff. It just pulled out the pieces it needed. And then a real key one, this. Notice what it's telling us here. So when you use DataStax Langflow, you need to have some way to authenticate against it, right? Because you don't want anybody to just come in an application and start running your flows, right? So you need to generate a token. What I find actually very cool, and I've experienced this with Copilot, especially the newer versions, they have made some cool strides in the last 3 months, and even the last couple months, they've really upgraded its capability. But it's telling, I didn't prompt this. It's telling me this. It's pointing this out to me, which is great, because if I didn't have it, it wouldn't work. So I'm going to come back over here. I'm going to say generate token. I'm going to grab that token, put it in my code. Okay, save that. Now, okay, good. I see. Oh, let's try it. Okay, get rid of that. Say hi. And I can see it's doing something, right? It is definitely doing something here. I'm curious to see what this output's going to be. This is always fun when we do this stuff live, isn't it? Blah, blah, blah. While we're waiting, let's see. I see some questions. Oh, thank you, Michelle, for putting the Copilot link in there. I appreciate that. Oh, good response, Orty. Thank you. Okay. Okay, yep. And I do see some questions in here. I will address the PDF stuff in our time at the end. Okay, so I see that it chunked on something, but the bot gave me this response. I don't understand that. So if I take a look, okay, so I have a hunch, but let's pretend I don't know what's going on here. I think it's working, but I keep getting this message, right? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say, you know something, like, again, I'm going to grab this. I'm like, this seems to be working, but I keep getting the message. I don't understand that. How might we fix this? Okay, so it's essentially saying, hey, let's add some debugging, right? So now it's modifying the code, right? It's modifying this code. Let's see what it's doing. Oh, I can see some debug info here. Okay. Okay, cool. So let's see. So I'm going to, again, I'm just going to pop this in because I'm being quick about it. Now, one thing I see right away is this ST, just to be clear, if you're not familiar with Streamlit, this is just an alias to Streamlit. So what it's going to do here is it's going to spit this out, right? This debug info. It's going to spit this out to my front end. I don't want that, actually. So what I want to do instead, I'm just going to print these. I don't want that going here, right? I think that's all it did. So let's refresh. Let's say hi. Let's see what it does this time. Oh, okay. So I still get, I don't understand that, but look at the output here. So I think what's happening, right? I think that it's the payload that's coming back that what we just said, create a basic chatbot, right? So what I want to do is let's find here the response. I have a hunch that we need to modify this code to know how to like work with this payload. So I can highlight this. Say where yeah, editor inline chat. I don't know why I brain farted there for a moment. Okay, then I'm going to say modify the following. I like to be very explicit with, by the way, to handle the correct payload response. Use message for the user input and the response for the bot. Now, you might be wondering where I got that message from. And if you remember here, I know that here message is the input variable that I need, the input value I need. Now, what it's doing here is, check this out. So I was able to inline say, hey, I want you to do this. I literally just gave it the whole JSON payload. I didn't even, I gave a little bit of instruction on like message and like response. But I can tell that now I have a different structure. So I'm going to accept that. I'm going to say, yep, I want that. So this output message has this new updated structure. And let's see what happens now. Okay. Does this work? Da-da. I don't know why, but what is that song? Baby, don't love me. That just popped in my head for some reason. I don't know why. It happens. Okay. Now let's see. Let me go over to the Q&A, by the way. Thank you for doing that. I see questions from Caleb. Where's the PDF with fillable fields added and how's the output connected to it? Okay. All right, I will get to those questions here in a moment. All right, so check this out. Check it out. So notice how now I'm getting a response, right? That looks like the LLM. Let's try it. Go, when did I start coding? Let's see what happens. Boom, there it is. So now we're hooked up, right? Like we were already hooked up, but now we're getting the correct responses. And what's actually super fun about this, if I come back here, let's ask a different question, right? Who am I? Right? So now my basic chatbot here, it is fully hooked up, right? And we were able to essentially build this with Streamlit. real time. And we'll have it give us this response here, but you can see that it did that. And what's cool is notice that as I'm asking questions, that they actually show up in my default session here in the playground. So I can start to see those in Langflow, even if I'm doing things from the app itself. And I'm actually surprised that is taking as long as it is. Usually that's, there it goes. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. So this is, again, this is based off the information that is coming out of that PDF, right? And it's talking about my career at Northrop and blah, blah, blah. So there you go. So here we, like, boom, there it is. Like, you've got this cool setup where we started with nothing. We use Copilot to help us build using this SDK. And all we did was go off of what was provided in here. In about, what, 5 steps or so, we were able to get it to, build. Obviously, this would not be the thing I'm going to launch in production. I would build a real app and everything, but you can see you can start to use it to have this conversation with it. I've definitely found that, especially when I'm running into errors or things like that, or like maybe I'm missing a particular library I'm not familiar with, it does a pretty darn good job of either getting it right or pointing me in the right direction. All right, so, and I see some hearts coming through. I appreciate that. All right, so I saw some questions. Let me do this. I just want to answer one question here, and then I'm going to get to your questions, right? Because you had some really great questions in here. So a question that I get all of the time, right? I hear this at events and at conferences and things like that, is RAG still relevant? Because you hear about the context windows getting like really, really big, right? And here's what it really comes down to, is that even if context windows were infinite, and instead of what you saw me do here, where I just pulled back a relevant chunk out of some text and applied that to the LLM, I could apply 1,000 books of information to the LLM in context, right? Well, number one, you're paying for all those tokens on every generation, right? So there's that. Then when you increase the amount of tokens, you're also increasing the processing time on the LLM, right? So you make it take longer, and you're paying for all that kind of stuff. And what it really comes down to, databases, they've been around for decades. They were built specifically to optimize on fast storage and retrieval, especially like an OLTP database like Astra. A lot of the ones that are pretty much any of the ones that I can think of that you would use for this kind of application for vector indexing are going to be transactional databases, as in OLTP databases. They were built to be able to store and retrieve very fast, and they are much, much cheaper than sending all those tokens to the LLM. So even if you have a case where you have a huge context window, right, it's better to pull back just the relevant data that the LLM can focus on to give you a more accurate result, right? Okay, so let me get to some of your questions here. And by the way, if you want to find out more, like this will bring you to our devs page. So if you want to get more into Astra, Langflow, and things like that, you want to start building stuff. Again, Langflow itself is open source, so you can just pip install Langflow, or you could go to the GitHub repo. If you did it through the DataStax AI platform, our free tier is like free forever. It's super generous. Like, you could absolutely experiment and never pay a cent, right? So scan that code, that'll get you that kind of information. But now I'm going to get to some of the questions, because there was some really good Q&A in here. All right, let's see. Galgan, let me see if I do this right. Go to overlays. Boom. All right, here we go. What is the difference you would do for moving to production? Great question. So for one, there are a couple different things you can do. You may or may not want to treat Langflow as an API server. You absolutely can do that. You can run this in a headless mode. As a matter of fact, a lot of the stuff that you see, like when you're rendering in the UI, there's more overhead and everything, but you can run it in a headless mode. And when you're using the API, it's actually faster under the hood because you're not doing this part. But there's another option here, right? Is you can export the flow as a JSON blob. And then if you go over to API here, you see this option here, where you can just load it as a JSON blob. And what you're doing is encapsulating all of the GenAI logic in your code. It only works for Python right now. That's the only place we have support for that. But that is one way. Like, I personally, when I'm deploying an application, I may take this as, I'll like use the JSON blob as my version. I'll say, this is the version 1.0 of this. I'm going to deploy it as a package with my app. The whole of the AI, the GenAI logic is encapsulated in my code now. And I no longer need to rely on Langflow as an API server. But when I'm testing or experimenting, or I'm in dev and staging and that kind of deal, I absolutely use this. Why? Because when I'm iterating, we've seen this a lot. Maybe I want to use a different model, right? Maybe I want to use Grok Gemma for something, right? Well, real time, while my application's hooked up to the API, I can just wire up Grok. I don't need to change my application code. So from that standpoint, I really like this from doing it in dev and everything like that. But there are folks that use this as an API server, even in a production case. But again, you have that option to load it as a blob as well. All right, let me go ahead and do that. Now, hopefully they answer your question. Wait, I want to make sure I did that right. Okay. Okay, cool. Let's see what else. Oh yeah, Caleb, I did promise I was going to get to your question here. So let me go ahead and get Caleb's question out. Great. Where is the PDF with the fillable fields added, and how is the output connected to it to fill the proper fields in the PDF form? So if I'm understanding your question right, it's actually a little bit the opposite. And what we're doing here is super simplistic, right? We're literally using, Langflow has some basic support PDFs. That's why I'm able to pull the data out. But it's not very intelligent, right? It's just literally just pulling like the text data out of the PDF. There are other tools out there, like unstructured.io comes to mind. They have tools specifically geared towards like pulling out the meat of like a PDF, and you can pick and choose and stuff like what you want to use. They have an integration with us as well. Matter of fact, if I go to if I go to Astra, you'll see this unstructured data PDF. That's exactly what it's using. We have that direct integration with them, but it specializes in more intelligently pulling out, and they have like, God, they support like 100 different file types or something like that. So when you have that kind of unstructured, like not CSV, not structured data or whatever, and you want to be able to pull that out, there are really good tools to use for that. So where's the PDF with fillable fields added? And how's the output? So yeah, so to the fillable fields thing, if I'm understanding your question properly, again, the file component here is just going to pull in like essentially all the text. If you wanted more intelligent control over the parts of the PDF that you were pulling in, that's where you would use unstructured. Let's see. How's it connected to fill the proper fields in the PDF form? Yeah, in this case, we are literally just iterating through. So we're just taking the text of the PDF and chunking through the data here. This part of it isn't very intelligent from that standpoint. Let me know if I'm kind of on the right track though with your question. I'm not sure I'm getting you the answer you're looking for. All right, let me see what else I got. Let me answer this one. Okay, I see. Yeah, Sibur, let me get your stuff in there. Actually, I'll put all of your questions in there so I can do this a little faster. All these wonderful questions. Thank you so much for the interaction, everybody. I really appreciate that. All right, let me get to the next one here. I'm using an external app to send the input chat text to the chat input. Okay, is there any way to send a file? Yes, as a matter of fact, when you are, like if you're using the file component, it does have upload support. As a matter of fact, I believe, I haven't done this in a while, but I want to say that there is support in here for uploading a file. And it's actually in this code. Oh, yes, you see that, right? So like I said, I haven't done it in a while, but if you take a look at the SDK that is generated for you in your Langflow flow, it does come with that as base part of the support. Okay. Let's see, who do I? Orti, what are the best 3 practices you can give to beginners in the Langflow low code stage? Yeah, I'd say first one, start with the templates. Make your life easy. The templates, there are some really great templates in here. Even in this order, start with a basic prompt. If you've never set up a basic chatbot before, like a ChatGPT like interface, it's actually super simple. And then when you start to like get the feel for, that's where my prompt comes into play. That's how that works. This is how I can work with the different LLMs. That'll help you kind of like set that foundation of knowledge. A RAG is really just a modified chatbot, right? It's an extended chatbot, if you will. Now, the agents are also a lot, they're quite interesting. Even if you're not looking to work with agentic flows, I would actually really suggest taking a look at it. Because what agentic flows do is they give agency to the LLMs where they can use tools and they can make decisions, use reasoning to determine what tool you need. An example might be they're historically very bad at math, right? So you can hook up a calculator tool and then the LLM goes, oh, I have this tool. So if somebody asks me a math question, I can go use that, right? And again, it helps you build up the knowledge. But I would start with the templates, honestly. That would be one thing. Another thing is I personally like to hook my app up early because it is super easy to do. Once I've got that going, like what you saw over here, right? The setup, once you learn the payload and you're like, that's what the payload looks like, I know how to talk to this thing. Now you can iterate super fast, right? Because you can modify your GenAI logic real time with your app, right? The last thing I'll say to that is for those of us who have been used to the speed at which we can execute like operations against databases and backend services and that kind of deal, do not expect the same thing. LLMs are a whole different beast, right? So if you had an app that at one point was operating at like thousands or tens of thousands of operations a second or something like that, LLMs by their nature and what they're doing, even the fast ones, some of them are coming out in the 100 millisecond range, but they still might take a couple seconds to respond. So one thing I've actually learned is that a lot of the times, depending on the kind of application, like this is just a chat, it's a back and forth. But like we actually created an app just recently where we needed to create a whole set of fake movie quotes. And we originally started with doing one quote at a time, but the LLMs take too long. So what we started doing was saying, well, give me 20 quotes at a time. Well, guess what? They're super good at that. They can generate 20 quotes in about the same time it takes them to do the one. So sometimes kind of batching up a question or something might be a good way to get some more performance out of it, even though you're really kind of just working around it. All right, let's see. Let me see. I see the next one here. I did answer that one. Okay, let me mark that as answered. Okay. All right, let's see. We've got Syed. All right, let me pull this one up. Boom. All right, the way you provided the PDF file to train LLM and ask questions, can we do the similar thing but in a different way? Giving some example of resumes based on... Oh, absolutely. Funny enough, you asked that question, Syed. As part of what I do here, right, a while ago, we did a hackathon, and I had built a build log judger. And it was essentially a big modified RAG pipeline that instead of ingesting a PDF, I actually used Dropbox. I hooked it up to Dropbox, and we had our hack event attendees drop their build log, the stuff for judging, into this thing, and then it would actually pull it in and read it. Yeah, you're not limited to a PDF at all, right? You can pull in all sorts of data. Really what's more important is the format, like is it unstructured like a PDF or is it like a CSV? And then just getting that into the format that you need, like vectorizing the right part of it. Because like in the case of a PDF, like if we take a look at this, in the case of a PDF, I'm just pulling out these text chunks and I'm just vectorizing those, right? But let's say that I had a different case where, right, let's say that I had a case where I have other metadata or something like that. This isn't the greatest case, but like I have a movies data set where I've got all this metadata. I'm not vectorizing all of it. I only want to vectorize the description or something like that, right? So I can modify the things that I'm vectorizing when I input it. So yeah, you're not limited at all to a PDF or something like. You can ingest all sorts of file types, resumes, whatever. And really the key thing, and this goes back to the previous question about like best practices. The key thing, especially if you're scraping from like a URL or something like that, you can absolutely pull in like from a URL and scrape it. Well, guess what? There's all sorts of extraneous HTML artifacts in that web page that I do not want to vectorize, right? So you want to make sure you're getting the core information that you're looking for, the meat, if you will. Vectorize that. You'll have a much better accuracy and response rate. Okay. All right. And I know we're almost at time. I'm trying to get through as many of these questions as I possibly can. Let's see. Mark that one as answered. And okay, here I see this one here. And I will try to answer one more. I see all these wonderful interactions, by the way. Thank you so much. Um, let's see. Here we go. All right, last one for now. I'm going to deploy my Langflow JSON in an AWS instance. My flow uses AstroDB. If I deploy the flow in AWS Cloud, would there be anything more than providing a token to AstroDB? No, that's a great question. You very well may need, yes, the answer is yes. You probably need your LLM API key, whatever that is you're using, or however you're going to connect to your LLM, you're going to need to provide that. Now, one of the options when you export is to save with my keys. So you can click on that, just recognize now you're exposing those. So you want to protect that file, but you can do that. That does make that a lot easier. But yes, you probably will, whatever LLM you're using, you're going to need a key. All right. Now with that, everybody, thank you all for your attention today and everything. We are at time. That is many questions I can get through. And again, as always, I appreciate everybody's interaction. I hope you learned something today. This kind of like end of the year live stream is the last one we're doing before all the holidays and everything. So everybody, happy holidays. Thank you so much and take care.